doctors of Reddit. Have you ever seen someone outside of work and thought, wow, that person needs to go to the hospital now? What were the symptoms that made you think this? Also a doctor. Couple of times come to mind. 1. Wife wakes up, decides not to go to gym as her stomach hurts, goes back to bed. This is unusual, but I just went about my weekend morning of breakfast and TV. She wakes a couple of hours later, still sore abdomen. Have a look. Tender to touch and percussion. Tapping, not a great sign. Quick pregnancy test, we were trying, which was faintly, and it was straight to ED. A few hours later and she's in OT for ruptured ectopic with 1/2 liter of blood in her pelvis. All okay thankfully. 2. This one was quite recent. At my son's group music class, another kid coughing constantly. Sounds like a seal barking. Look at him and he's barely participating. Lying on his grandmother's lap. NWCK muscles straining with every breath. Nasty group. Grandma actually took a fair bit of convincing that he needed prompt attention. Group is such an butthole. My 6-year-old has had it more times than I can count. Just when we thought he'd grown out of the worst of it, he had his worst attack. 15 minutes from a little breathy to straight out blue. Don't mess with kids and their air. They kinda need it. Obligatory, not a doctor, but my whole family are doctors. Seriously, both my siblings, my mother and my father are doctors. I live abroad, but went home to visit my family over the Christmas holiday and unfortunately had to leave my husband back in the UK. I got off the plane and I felt pretty crappy, but I just chalked it up to motion sickness from the long airplane ride. However, over the next few days I just got worse and worse. I felt really nauseous and exhausted, and I had terrible pain in my stomach. This went on for about a week. My mum was the first one who called it, told me I was definitely pregnant. I completely denied it. I had an IUD and I hadn't missed a period, so in my mind there was no way I could be pregnant. When my mum found out I had an IUD, she forced me to go to emergency immediately. Turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy. Luckily they caught it very early, so no damage to my fallopian tubes or my reproductive future. But yeah, she definitely saved me. If I had waited to go to the doctors after I had returned home, it would have been way too late. So very thankful for my genius mum. I won't be able to see her over the holidays this year. Now I really miss her. I have an IUD and an ectopic pregnancy is my worst nightmare. You have some stubborn sides there. For all other girls out there, if you are showing symptoms of pregnancy and you have an IUD, go to the doctor or you could die. When I was 4 years old, my mom realized I was drinking an abnormal amount of water. She had to go to work at that time. She's a doctor, but told my babysitter that if I asked for more water within the next hour to give me warm water. Warm water is disgusting and most children won't drink it. I, of course, asked for more water 5 minutes later and my babysitter told my mom right away. My mom was home within 10 minutes, and I was in the ER 10 minutes later. Excessive thirst is a pretty common sign of high blood sugar and my mom confirmed something was wrong with her hot water trick. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes that day. Nurse here was shopping for jeans and noticed a suspicious lesion on the sale assistant's arm. Advise him to get it checked. Go back 2 months later and same dude has giant dressing over his arm protruding out of shirt collar up his neck. Dude hugs me and says thank you, it was a melanoma. Crazy. Slightly off topic, but my mother, trauma surgeon, is the worst person to fly with. So far she has diverted 3 planes for people having in-flight medical issues and the plane not having enough the right supplies for the flight to keep going. She once got in an argument with the pilot about whether or not the patient was sick enough to cause a diversion. Also, she was many years ago, she was at a high school football game. Kid broke his arm and had no pulse in his wrist, meaning the blood flow to his hand was cut off. She field set the bone to restore blood flow, then put him in the ambulance. Then she went back to her seat to watch the rest of the game. Your mom is a boss. I'm in school now to become a physician assistant. One of our professors was telling us a story about his time in med school. They have actors come in to be patients for exams. I forget what the particular scenario was, but the patient had pretty significant edema that became visible in the exam. Our prof goes, "Do not do this during your examinations. I'm serious. Do not do this." What I did next was I turned to the camera. I said, "This is not part of my examination. He turned to the actor and said, "Are you seeing someone about the edema in your legs?" Actor, "No, prof. Okay, you are to not have any salty foods until you do. After this exam, I want you to call your doctor. Tell him or her you need to see them tomorrow. Okay?" Actor, "Okay, professor." Turns to camera, "Okay, I'm resuming my examination." He passed. Not me but my dad, who's been an anesthetist for many years now. He used to operate before monitors were common in the less developed parts of the world, and so used to monitor a patient's heartbeat by checking the pulse on patients' wrists. Over time he developed a habit from this, and when he handshakes anyone, his 2 fingers immediately go to the person's pulse. Once he meets an acquaintance in the street, sensed from the handshake that something was wrong and told him to go to the hospital ASAP because he had atrial fibrillation. That's like a superpower. I'm a nurse. When I first started working, I would see a patient and think, oh wow, this person really needs to go to the hospital and needs a nurse. Then I realized that's me and I panicked for a while. I had the same experience as an EMT. Someone should call 911. Oh crap, I am 911. Graveyard RN here. One day after I woke up, my husband said someone in our World of Warcraft guild was asking if anyone was a doctor or a nurse. So I logged on and talked to our guildie, who was having classic appendicitis symptoms, and I told him I thought he might have a hot appy. Didn't see him online for almost 24 hours. When he came back on, I asked how he was feeling. He said he was logging in from the hospital and had his appendix removed. I was glad I could help. I'm a psychologist in training with a specialty in developmental disabilities. It's always tough when I'm in a social situation and see a kid showing clear signs of autism, since early support can make a big difference. But it's very risky to even raise the possibility of such a huge bombshell outside of a professional setting. Also, an actual doc had a janitor who I was friendly with stop by to shoot the crap. Just small talk sort of stuff. He says, "I've been doing great but my left leg's killing me." For whatever reason I say, "Is it swollen?" No idea why. There are a million reasons for leg pain. It just came to me and of course it is. Right leg's normal. I think you have a DVT. You need to go get that checked. Like today. He, being a typical male, and I can say that because I do dumb crap all the time too, says, "No, I'll just tough it out." Long story short, had to go to his boss to get him to go to the hospital. Clearly had a DVT and if I recall correctly had some small pays. Super nice guy. Did fine. Your response is pretty cool, but I don't know what any of your acronyms mean. My cousin is a nurse and I wanted a second opinion on my tit. After seeing my doctor the previous day, I sent a photo of my tit and my cousin replied hospital. Now, I had mastitis turn abscess from breastfeeding. It was the worst case anyone at my hospital had seen. Heck, they had doctors, nurses and students all coming in to see my tit. By the time I had surgery, this infection was protruding and filled with blood and pus. It went from red and swollen to pus and blood within 6 hours. It was huge. After surgery they stuffed my boob with 5 feet of gauze. It was removed by one nurse who had zero clue I had no painkillers in my system at the moment. I bawled and screamed in the shower as she ripped it all out. She apologized after realizing I felt every bit of that gauze coming out. Worst experience of my life hands down. I had to have a nurse come daily and change my packing and bandages for 6 weeks because the gaping hole almost made me pass out after the gauze removal. In a hoe. Thank God my cousin told me to go. This made me cringe so hard. Glad you're okay now and so sorry you had to go through that. How the frick did your doctor not notice something that serious? Ugh. I had a friend call me to ask my advice. A mutual friend of ours was pregnant and at 35 weeks. They were all out to dinner and about to go see a movie when this mutual friend had mentioned she hadn't felt the baby move in about 10 hours. So my friend called to ask if they should call her doctor. I'm not a doctor, just someone who has been pregnant before. But even I knew that was bad news bears. I told them to forego calling the doctor, just go to L&D to get monitored ASAP. They got her there and they found the baby very low amniotic fluid and the blood oxygen levels were so low that the doctors were surprised the baby was still alive. Emergency C-section and baby and mom were fine. Still scares me to think that if they hadn't called or she never spoke up, What could have happened? My grandfather was walking up a hill and got a bit winded, more so than usual. He's diabetic, so thought it may be related and played it off as if it was nothing. A week goes by and he's still complaining. Feels a constant pain in his chest and shortness of breath. Finally he decoded to see the doctor, who takes one look at him and tells him to go across the street to the hospital. An EKG and a couple tests later, it turns out he had a heart attack and needed quadruple bypass. Were it up to him, he'd never have even gone to the doctor in the first place. Not a doctor, but my father went in for an abdominal hernia surgery and was going to put under general anesthesia. He gets put under and before he knows it he's back. The surgeon and anesthesiologist both tell him that they couldn't complete the procedure because he went into atrial fibrillation, AFib, and should go see his cardiologist. Cardiologist ran some tests and suggests having an angiogram done. Turns out he had a 90% blockage in one artery and a 99% blockage in another, so it was time for him to join the Zipper Club with a double bypass surgery. TLDR. An aborted abdominal hernia correction procedure enabled my father to avoid a heart attack, probably saving his life. Just to clear some things up, my father was able to walk out of the hospital after said aborted hernia procedure. I even picked him up. Second, it took about a month of tests to finally get to the angiogram, which was scheduled after he had a stress test done. Third, he was seeing the associated cardiologist weekly and was put on heavy blood thinners and ordered to rest. Now I don't remember every test that was done, but that pretty much sums everything up. My father has however since switched cardiologists at the behest of the former cardiologist to someone associated with the Cleveland Clinic who is a specialist in atrial fibrillation. Not a doctor, but I am a medical student. Final year. One day I was out in the city and I saw a man collapsed under this busy bridge. At first I thought it was just a drunk homeless man passed out, but as I got closer it was clear that his whole body was jerking. Looked a lot like a tonic-clonic seizure, characteristic of epilepsy but could be other things. He'd hit his head pretty hard and nobody was helping, so I went and moved his legs out of the road. Tried to get him on his side act. Called an ambulance and eventually the guy stops seizing. Wakes up confused and exhausted, which is not uncommon. Ambulance arrives. Dude says he's never had a seizure before. His head is bleeding and he just straight up refuses to get in the ambulance, despite the paramedics trying their hardest to convince him. All new seizures need to be investigated. Could be anything from a brain tumor to alcohol withdrawal, but nope. He didn't care. Wonder what happened to him in the end. This was in the UK, so he definitely wasn't refusing help because of financial reasons. Years ago I had a really bad virus of some kind. I was coughing so bad that I was literally peeing myself. I had diaper pads under and mattress protector because I could not hold anything, I was coughing so hard. At one point I heard a snap and I felt what I thought was my rib break. I got out of bed and headed for the nearest ER at like 2 AM. They called it atypical bronchitis and sent me home with antibiotics. Didn't do x-rays on the ribs at all. Week later I was no better. In fact I was worse. During my illness some people moved in next door. The guy in the apartment next to me was a pediatrician and he heard me coughing. He came over and took one look at me and the next thing you know I was in his office and he was checking things out. I didn't have bronchitis. I had whooping cough and that doctor next door, he probably saved my life. I had cracked 2 ribs at that point. It was that bad. A month later I get a huge bill from the ER. He went over there and basically got it dismissed on the basis of malpractice. He was just furious with them. Not only did they frick up and get it wrong, they had the gall bill like $2,000 for doing it. Thing is, this was going around and by law it had to be reported, so he had good reason to be upset. Me too. They nearly killed me by not getting it right, but they also put a lot of people in jeopardy by not taking action early on. Note, even if you had shots, don't assume you are protected. I'd had them, plus boosters. They didn't take. 1% of shots for that don't take. 1 in 100 is at risk. Freaking vaccinate your children. People die from that. Doctor here. A few family friends have died in the past few days and I've spent more time answering questions from relatives about what exactly heart failure is, etc. When it comes to spotting medical problems directly, I've been lucky so far, but you do tend to stick to the stock advice of see a doctor who isn't me. Dad's foot has swollen up with a huge infection. He needs to go to the hospital, pretty sure that's gout. but you need to see the GP tomorrow. It was gout. What do you make of this boob lump? Pretty sure that's a cyst, but get yourself to a surgeon in the next 48 hours. It was a cyst. My testicle is swollen and really sore and I'm freaking out cause Google said I'm gonna need surgery. Hold on, I'll send you a photo. 95% sure I'll get arrested if you send me a photo of your preteen junk. It's probably orchiditis or a bruise or something, but get mum to take you to the GP like right now. Weirdly that one was epididymitis. I'm not a doctor, but I know a family who was at a park one day. A doctor walked up to the parents and said, "Is that your son?" while pointing at their child. When they said yes, he responded, "I'm a doctor. You should take your son to the hospital immediately. The shape of his abdomen and the way he is walking looks like he may be very ill." They decided to follow the random doctor's advice and took their son to the hospital. As it turned out, he had cancer. Thankfully, he is now healthy and in remission. But without that one doctor, he may not be here today. Thank God for doctors. Dental assistant here. One of my teachers quietly approached her friend at a dinner party and asked if she could palpate that lump on his neck. It turned out to be very aggressive cancer that took a lot of his neck and jaw, but he lived. Turns out, the guy hadn't been to the doctor in a decade, but was religiously going to his dentist every 3 months. However, his dentist chose not to do head and neck exams, which used to be considered an essential thing in dentistry. My teacher used the story to emphasize that dental assistants are more than the people holding the saliva sucker in your mouth. We know a whole lot about the head and neck, so let us feel your lymph nodes if we ask. Let us shine the cancer detector down your throat if we ask. And if you feel something weird on your neck, but unable to get to a doctor, see if your dental team will palpate it. We're strange people. We will palpate your lumps. Happened yesterday. I heard a clerk at a gas station saying he fainted 3 times that day. Turns out he was on spinal chemo and antibiotics for infection. Bunch of different things could have caused the fainting, but several possibilities were serious, and at his age he was one bad fall away from something serious anyway. Told him to get a buddy to pick him up and take him to the hospital. I got my rectum and colon checked, aka colonoscopy, at 25 because of a medical student said he thought I might have a rare disease. Context: met him Dr. A at a concert through a friend who was also a medical student. Dr. A hesitantly asked if colon issues run in my family. Tell him I think so. Why? Proceeds to say there is a rare disease of colon and rectum issues, and symptoms can be freckles on the lips, of which I have. He highly suggests I get a check because it could be life-threatening. Tell my wife, and few days later I'm sitting amongst 50-year-olds who all know where we've been the last 12 hours. The rectum scanning doctor was very lovely and ended up complimenting my colon and rectum, saying it's one of the best she's seen. TLDR, met acquaintance at concert, who's a med student, thinks I have a rare life-threatening disease. Get colonoscopy. Nothing but, pun intended, cleanest rectum colon doctor has ever seen. I had a friend with Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. He had the cutest freckled lips you've ever seen, which didn't seem too strange because he had freckles everywhere else, too. He had red hair, grey eyes and eyelashes with white blonde tips. He died from cancer at age 36. That student was right to be concerned. Good on you for listening. Nurse here. Found a weird mole on my mom's back. We have a strong family history of melanoma, so I'm super cautious with anything abnormal of the skin. I kept pushing her to get it checked out. Goes to dermatologist and the dermatologist says it's nothing to worry about and that she didn't want to biopsy it. My mom told her to go ahead and biopsy it. Ended up being precancerous. I can't imagine my life without my mom. Thank God we got that one taken care of. No, not every mole is precancerous. For a mole to be precancerous, they look at it under a microscope and determine its degree of abnormality. If it meets the criteria, for example, cell shape, size, shape, etc., it is not yet at the stage to be classified as melanoma. It is determined as in situ, basically meaning it is abnormal but not enough to be considered melanoma yet, therefore, leading to the term precancerous. Harmless and harmful moles are almost indistinguishable to the eye pretty often. I'm surprised the dermatologist wasn't gonna err on the side of caution. Nurse here. Family friend said his throat was really sore for the last few days. Asked him what else had changed. He said everything tasted kind of metallic. Took a look in his throat and told him to get into the doctor ASAP. He had severe throat cancer but is doing great now. Pretty much the opposite to what you are asking, but my wife went over her ankle wearing heels last year. I convinced her to not go to the ED for 3 weeks before finally taking her. I was making fun of her being a hypochondriac the whole time. Turns out she had a fractured metatarsal. I am an ED doctor. We went to the department I now work at permanently. I will never live this down. Guy had fallen and cut his head. You know how heads bleed badly from even a tiny cut? Well, the thing that struck me was that he wasn't bleeding from this gouge in his head from hitting the pavement when he fell. I thought this was a little odd. Turned out his heart had stopped. He lived, with the addition of an internal pacemaker. Ribs really do crunch when you do chest compressions. Of course, I'm not a doctor. My buddy had this happen to him. Owned an art gallery, having a big opening. A local MD took one look at him and said something along the lines of, check yourself into a hospital now or you will die. He's waiting on a liver transplant now. My father is a doctor, and while this happened in his office it was outside of his regular specialty. So, he's an allergist. One day a patient comes in, gets his shot, and everything is fine. My father asks him if anything else is bothering him or how things have been lately, and the guy shows him a small cut on his thumb. My father takes one look at it and says you need to go to the ear now. He actually said not to even pay the receptionist on his way out. Just go to the ear. Flesh-eating bacteria. Nasty stuff. The guy came back a week or 2 later after he had been successfully treated and thanked my father. Somewhat related story. Me and my wife went to Italy on our honeymoon. We parked the rental car, hiked for an hour or 2 and took a small train back to our car. The sun was really hot. And stupidly enough all we had to drink the entire trip was a beer each. The train reaches our stop and we get up. Now, my wife is a small lady, being dehydrated from the trip, sitting down in a cool train for a few minutes and then suddenly standing up. She looks at me, mutters, "This isn't going to work," and collapses like a bag of potatoes on the train floor. I panic. The doors only stay open for a few seconds, and we need to get off at this stop. I do the only thing I can think of. I pick her up and carry her dramatically out the doors. When I put her down she is slowly coming to and starts vomiting all over the ground. I look up and there's a concerned crowd gathering around, asking if we need help, if they should call somebody. It's okay. I'm a doctor, I say, for the first and probably last time in my life. Suddenly, everyone gathered sigh with relief and smile as they disperse, wishing us good luck. All that's going through my mind is, holy crap, I hope I'm right that she's just dehydrated. If she dies because I refused help she'll kill me. She survived. But I learned several lessons that day. If you're a doctor, people will assume you have a medical emergency under control. You really shouldn't be the one treating friends or family members if you can help it. And, it is way easier to pick up women if they're unconscious and your train is about to leave. I'm sorry but I giggled when she said, "This isn't going to work." I'm so glad she was okay, but it's funny how our brains process things when things aren't going right. MD here, psychiatrist. I see people that need help non-stop. Drunks at the bar, psychotic homeless, addicts of all shapes and habits. If someone looks bad enough, I stop and see if they'll head to the nearest ER. No one listens. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.